So welcome to another live session right here in the Facebook group. If you're watching this on replay, welcome. We are going to talk about chronic pain. Chronic pain is one of the most common symptoms of many chronic illnesses, and in particular autoimmune diseases. And I'm going to share with you why that is so. And then I'm going to share with you 3 ways that you can reduce it using food as medicine. And I'm also going to talk about why, why we consider food to be medicine and how it, it helps with lowering or how having an anti-inflammatory diet and anti-inflammatory lifestyle reduces pain, chronic pain in particular. So let's get going. So inflammation is something that is rampant. And again, if I talk about autoimmune diseases, anytime your immune system mounts a stress response, it is secreting, there is secretion of inflammatory chemicals or cytokines, which is a very natural part of the healing process. And it's but however, and this can happen in any part of the body, depending on which area of the body is being targeted by your immune system. It's an absolutely protective mechanism by which we repair our wounds and healing takes place, and is necessary for survival. The problem happens when this becomes chronic and then this inflammation becomes rampant. And the conventional approach to this is to, especially to pain due to any type of inflammation, is to seek physical therapy and medications such as strong painkillers. So it's again, if I tie it back to autoimmune diseases in particular, it's the same for chronic illnesses. But in particular, when there is the immune system at play, where the immune system is involved, and because at the root of any autoimmune disease is immune dysregulation, what happens is that these medications focus on shutting down the immune system, whether it's through immunosuppressive medications, other biologic drugs, or even steroids, or you're also, or we are also prescribed painkillers just to manage the pain. But at the end of the day, these drugs do nothing to address the root cause of why this pain is taking place. And that's what we're going to focus on a bit more in detail. So as you can see, chronic and rampant inflammation, is at the root of many of these kind of pain symptoms. That goes hand in hand with many chronic illnesses, and in particular autoimmune diseases where the immune system has become dysregulated and has become hypervigilant, which is why people who have autoimmune diseases have to live with chronic pain and struggle with chronic pain over long periods of time. But these medications give them a temporary relief, but nothing more than that. So let's go through a bit more about what a stress response is and what happens, what are the stress hormones that get secreted. Let's delve a bit deeper to understand what's really happening in your body. So a normal stress response to, as I mentioned, to any kind of perceived threat, and it can be real threat, it can be imaginary threat, it can be just thoughts in your head. Your body has just one type of response to that. And it releases the stress hormones like cortisol and even others like adrenaline and noradrenaline. This is supposed to be an acute stress mechanism by which your body is trying to protect you. And cortisol, again, is actually a very powerful anti-inflammatory agent. And we'll discuss cortisol a bit in more details later on. But right now, you need to know that it's an anti-inflammatory agent so that it can sort of help your body deal with the acute stressor and help you to survive by mobilizing glucose reserves, like just preparing your body for fight or flight. In the short term, this stress response is life-saving and even necessary. The problem happens when this becomes chronic, this kind of response becomes chronic, and inflammation over a period of time becomes rampant. So some people, let me just talk about stress a bit. Some people may not have any emotional triggers, but they may be over-exercising, they may not be sleeping enough, they may have food sensitivities. All of these can act as stressors. So otherwise, they can be pretty settled as far as their minds are concerned. And this is again very common with women. Many of us today are over-exercising, overcompensating for a lack of energy. And I'll talk about where, what role cortisol has to play there. Other women can have very good, physical health, but they might be dealing with anxiety, depression, being worried all the time. And both of these actually act as stressors. Even these behaviors act as stressors for our body. And they cause the same kind of stress response and cause stress hormones to be secreted from the adrenal glands. The thing is that our bodies are really well designed to help us survive in the long, to deal with any kind of these kind of stressors. The problem happens when these things all become chronic and our body has not evolved over millions of years to deal with the kind of chronic stress that we are living in today. I'm just going to head over and see if there's anything that I need to. Give me a second. Okay, so again, our bodies are perfectly designed and capable. It's just that we are asking it to live in an environment that's not really what it has been suited for. Maybe in another million years or so, or maybe less, we will evolve to deal with this kind of chronic stress. So this kind of chronic stress, which leads to overactivation of the immune system, means that we are at risk of developing inflammatory conditions, and these conditions have really become very common, whether it's hives, whether it's allergies, whether it's eczema, inflammation in the gut. This is becoming more and more common. And this kind of low-grade infection over long periods of time leads to weight gain. I think another thing that many of us are familiar with, we have a whole group of people who are actually overweight, especially in the abdominal region. And it's no coincidence that that's the case, right? So this low-grade inflammation is at the root of many of our weight gain, brain fog, migraines, insomnia, aches and pains, depression, right? So there is a huge connection between these two. Elevated cortisol levels also inhibit our immune response. So as I mentioned, that in the short run, this elevated cortisol levels act as a lifesaver, but in the long run, and it does so by inhibiting the immune response so that our body can get geared up to fight or flight. But if it continues over long periods of time, then the problem is that it leaves us open to actually catch every cold, every flu, and every bug that's going around. And also the other thing that high cortisol levels do is it suppresses thyroid function and active thyroid production. So as you can see, chronic stress, and no matter whether it's perceived or real, it goes it has a far-reaching impact on our overall health. So now if we want to delve a bit deeper into cortisol, and because stress is what I'm talking about today, and we will of course be talking about 3 ways that you can sort of reduce pain from the downstream effects of stress to as using food as medicine. So let's touch upon cortisol a bit more in detail so that you understand what's really going on. There are of course other hormones at play here, most notably adrenaline and noradrenaline. But right now, I am focusing on the master hormone, which is cortisol, which has a huge role to play in an overall health. And I think you'll be able to appreciate, the role that it plays in your life. It's a master hormone. It affects nearly every cell in our body. That means that it affects our metabolism. It affects the sleep-wake cycle. It affects cardiovascular function, immune function, blood sugar, bone health, and fight, flight, freeze, submit response. For survival, right? So all of these are very critical functions that cortisol takes care of and affects, which is why I'm talking about this in details. There is also the day-night rhythm between, and it's like a dance between cortisol and sleep hormone melatonin, which is the other reason I'm talking about this, because good quality sleep is really necessary for many areas of our health, for overall health, and cortisol plays a role here too. And based on our body clock, cortisol starts levels, needs to start going down in the evening, in the afternoon and evening, so that your melatonin levels can rise. Melatonin is your sleep hormone, which ensures that you get good quality sleep. It's not otherwise, and I'll talk about that also. We wake up not feeling refreshed and energetic in the morning. And this dance between cortisol and melatonin, melatonin can only rise once cortisol has gone down. So this dance is key for getting good quality sleep. But the other thing that you need to understand is that we need enough cortisol to raise our blood sugar levels in the morning, but not too much that we also raise our insulin levels and make it a problem, which is why balanced cortisol is key. So too high can eventually lead to other downstream effects, including high blood sugar levels. And actually, chronic stress in this manner is a contributor to weight gain and high blood sugar all on its own. So even if you're having a very healthy diet, low sugar, low refined carbs, stress all by itself can contribute to high blood sugar levels and weight gain, right? So this is something that sort of might be a surprise to you. And we also need enough cortisol, not too high, it's like a Goldilocks situation, but we need adequate levels of cortisol so that we can get up feeling refreshed. We need that burst of energy, and so that we have enough sugar, enough energy in the morning. Optimal levels are also necessary so that we have enough body fat, but not too much. Body fat acts as a insulation and provides warmth and also cushioning for various organs. So you need enough levels of cortisol. And if you do not have enough levels, adequate levels of cortisol, then that's actually one of the primary reasons that people feel sluggish and tired and exhausted first thing in the morning, even in spite of getting a proper 7 to 8 hours of sleep. And in fact, this exactly what these are the kind of symptoms, this is exactly what I described, is extremely common in many people who are dealing with chronic illnesses, including autoimmune diseases. In fact, as far as autoimmune conditions are concerned, chronic pain and chronic fatigue are both the top two symptoms, right? And this is the reason why. So I hope that you're able to understand that the stress response that we have leads to chronic pain in different ways, and why balanced cortisol is key here. And the other thing is that, as I mentioned, cortisol is an anti-inflammatory agent. So if you don't have enough levels of cortisol, the other thing that happens is that we end up developing pain, especially in the morning, which is why many people, again, with many of these autoimmune conditions, get up in the morning with pain in their joints, in their muscles. Because what happens, this is what you need to understand, is that the initial stages of chronic elevated stress, your body responds with elevated levels of cortisol. This is kind of a hyperadrenal state because cortisol is produced in the adrenal glands. But if this continues over a long period of time, and this can be for many different reasons, and the stress does not resolve itself, our body may go into a more progressive hypoadrenal state. So that means that the body decides that enough is enough, because high levels of cortisol over long periods of time have all kinds of unwanted effects on the body. So it decides to sort of cut down on cortisol production and produces lower and lower levels of cortisol, as well as other hormones like adrenaline, and it as a protective mechanism. And that means that we reach a hypoadrenal state. And because of these two levels of these two crucial stress hormones reduce drastically, severe exhaustion sets in. This is the key there. And this takes place in combination with inflammation of joints, muscles, causing swelling, pain, localized pain, stiffness. Because as I mentioned, cortisol is an anti-inflammatory agent. So if you're not producing enough of it, then actually we end up also with chronic pain. So either scenario is not something that we want to sort of look for. So we need to find ways to ensure that we are able to deal with stress in a much more appropriate manner. I'm not going to talk so much about stress in this particular session. I will talk, probably broach the topic in another coaching session. But today I would like to move on towards food in particular. Because as Hippocrates said, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. So this is something that, has been coming down over thousands of years. And, this is something that I strongly believe in. Our traditional healthcare systems like Ayurveda has been, again, sort of practicing this. And this is one of the first things that I, sort of get into using food as medicine when I start working with women with autoimmune conditions, right? Because as I mentioned, food is medicine. And in fact, in the Indian cuisine, all the spices that we use all have anti-inflammatory properties. You might be familiar with haldi or turmeric, but there are many all the other spices also are equally healing in their own different ways. The herbs that we use, whether it's coriander, whether it's basil, tulsi, holy basil. So all of these plants have their own healing properties, which is why we talk about food as medicine, because food goes way beyond calories. It is also information. It speaks to our genes. It influences gene expression, and it ensures that we move towards health. So food is a primary factor in the healing process, right? And in fact, if I can share with you a story of a client that I worked with, and she had severe abdominal pain. She had several autoimmune diagnoses, and in her particular case, her gut was in really extremely poor shape. So we were struggling. She was already had cut down on many foods, so she was not getting enough nutrients. On the other hand, there was certainly something that she was still consuming which was not agreeing with her body at that point in time. Because sometimes you need to, of course, add in certain foods, but at the same time, for a period of time, you need to eliminate those foods which your body is not really able to digest and break down. And in her particular case, after working with her for a really long time, because you can't really test for these things, your body itself will be able to tell you with the help of the symptoms. And in her particular case, we realized it was the onions that she was having every single day, which was causing a problem. And when she stopped the onions, her pain went away. Her diarrhea, she had chronic diarrhea for almost 7 years. That went away. She went off the steroids and antibiotics that her doctors were putting her on every other week. So there is no one healthy diet for everyone. While food is medicine, you will need to figure out what is going to help you in your healing journey, what your body needs right now, and that's going to change over time, which is what also makes it a bit tricky. Which is why having someone to guide you can really help with that. So in general, what you need to move towards is having anti-inflammatory lifestyle, where food forms a significant part of it. And some of the key foods that we typically eliminate, right from the onset, if possible, is gluten, dairy, and sugar, the 3 most inflammatory foods. And this is particularly important if you're already diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, if you're trying to actively heal from anything. Because what happens is that once, if you are in a state where you need more of a maintenance, then you can sort of let go of these things a bit. But typically in the active healing phase, we need to be much more careful about foods like this, and even maybe other foods which your body may not be tolerating right now. But these are typically the 3 top inflammatory foods. And as a coach, I sort of guide my clients to to phase them out depending at their pace. I've had my clients who have been able to stop them in one day. They decided just to basically stop consuming these foods the next day. I've had other clients who took a month or more to sort of eliminate these foods from their kitchen, from their pantry. So it depends, right? There is no one right pace or right way. But at the end of the day, as much as you can reduce and eliminate, you will start seeing the results and you will start feeling better. Unhealthy fats is something else that I'm going to talk about a bit more, but it's important that you stop consuming fats which typically are the cooking oils that we cook with. This is, I find, a very, very large source of inflammatory foods, apart from gluten, dairy, of course, are the cooking oils that we consume. And that's something that we consume every single day in our foods. Because we cook our foods in that, right? And the problem is, the reason that I talk about this is because these oils are highly processed, they are refined, they smell or taste nothing like the source. If you're using sunflower cooking oil, it doesn't even smell anything like the sunflower seeds. Or if you're, whether it's groundnut, if it's highly processed, you will know, because these these oils will not smell anything, or they're completely bland, right? I mean, you would have seen that they are light and they are bland, they are odorless, they are colorless, right? Whereas if you actually use what I suggest to my clients, which are more cold pressed oils or wood pressed oils, which is the traditional way of how oils were produced before machines came onto the picture, before we mechanized each and every process. And these cold pressed organic oils smell and taste exactly like the source that they came from, whether it's sesame, whether it's coconut, whether it's mustard, even olive. So having very high quality oils and high quality fats getting into your system is extremely important. And equally important is reducing these inflammatory fats, because by the time when they're processed like this, they become highly inflammatory. The other thing to understand is that there are two main types of fats: omega-3, omega-6. Omega-6 are what I just discussed, and they're also in many nuts and seeds. Omega-3 is typically found in fatty fish and a few things like chia seeds, flax seeds, and walnuts. And typically we need to have a 1:1 ratio, but most of us end up having a 1:20 ratio, one of omega-3 and 20 of omega-6, because omega-6 is everywhere. So it's not that omega-6 is all bad, it's just that we have a skewed ratio. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the process of refining these oils make them highly inflammatory. The other thing that causes an inflammatory lifestyle is lack of sleep, lack of good quality sleep, because sometimes we don't really prioritize sleep, right? We look at our diet, we exercise and everything, but sleep is what gets shortchanged. Especially if you're already dealing with any kind of chronic illness, good quality sleep is going to be an integral part of your healing process. Otherwise, it's part of an unhealthy and inflammatory lifestyle, and this is something which has become really common. Exercise and movement, of course, there is a fine line between over-exercising, which has its own issues, which many women actually typically end up doing, because over-exercising also raises our cortisol levels. And if you're not giving your body adequate time to recover, then actually it becomes unhelpful, let me just put it this way, and creates more inflammation. Whereas if you are moving your body every single day and doing it, and interspersing it with adequate times of break, rest, recovery, the way a body was designed, that's what's going to really help you. So it's not an extreme situation. And last but not the least is minimizing toxins. Toxins are a whole different topic, and I will probably do a separate session on that. In fact, toxins are something, again, I dedicated a whole session towards, I take my clients through exactly what it means to, what toxins do. And, they have multiple effects, which are extremely devastating for our body. This is an area that is, again, usually overlooked, but it plays a critical role in disease progression, and it prevents us from getting better. So minimizing toxins, whether it's in your food, in your processed foods, refined foods, whether it's in the products that you're using, putting it on your skin, whether it's in the air, so many of my clients, I recommend that they use air filters, especially if they live in polluted cities like Mumbai, etc. I use air filters at home, especially at night during sleep. So all of these together, can help you to sort of lead an anti-inflammatory lifestyle, and help you to start getting better and reduce pain. And in particular, these are 3 ways that you can reduce chronic pain using food as medicine, right? These are 3 specific ways that I want to sort of leave you with. If you're watching this on replay, make sure that you drop in a comment and say rainbow in the comments below. and so that I can share with you this checklist, because one of the most effective ways and one of the most simple ways of making sure that you are having an anti-inflammatory diet is by having the colors of the rainbow, right? And if, I mean, ideally doing this every single day is really good, but even if you can't have all the colors, even if you start focusing on it, what you will find that it will become easier and easier to have all the colors throughout the week. So things like, red foods like apples, cherries, tomatoes, strawberries, there's so many raspberries, etc., right? Because each of these colors, each of these are called phytonutrients, and we can't really manufacture these. Phytonutrients are these chemicals produced by plants to help protect them from their enemies, right? Their natural enemies, whether it's pests, whether it's infections, etc., animals. And this is something that can help actually protect us from our own threats. But we can only get them from plants. We can't really manufacture it, which is why focusing on more of a plant-based diet is also important. It's both, right? And having a variety is important. So it's not enough to just have only one particular type of food. It's important that you are having various kind of colors. And the easiest way I find in that, we can sort of do that is by focusing on colors rather than trying to figure out which food you should be having on, which day. And this is exactly what I do in my own family. So what I do is that I'll have an idea about which are the vegetables that we will be having on certain dates. And then I will also end up making soups 3-4 times a week, at least 3 times a week. And I will ensure that we are having different colored soups, right? So and then, like, for example, I know that blue and purple colors are really hard to sort of get into our diet, at least in India. So whether it's blackberries, blueberries, purple cabbage and carrots don't really go down well in my family. Maybe it's dates. Plums, yes, cherries, yes, but we don't end up always having. So I typically have a smoothie in the morning. My kids have a smoothie in the morning, and I ensure that I put the berries in so that they're having these colors every single day. So there are ways to work around it, but just to keep in mind that having these colors of the rainbow is an extremely efficient way and a highly effective way of lowering inflammation in your body, and lowering pain levels over a period of time. The other very effective way of, again, having an anti-inflammatory diet is, you can crowd out unhealthy foods, because sometimes it's difficult. This is a very practical way, and I help my clients with this. It's difficult to always say that I'm going to go off these foods and I'm going to only have healthy foods. And it may or may not be always possible to do that from so many different reasons, whether it's a matter of habit. So a very, very effective way of doing this is to, slowly start adding more and more of the foods that you want to eat, that are good. There's healthy fats, carbs, proteins, vegetables, all of that, and slowly crowd out the foods that you don't want to have. If, for example, if you are dealing with high blood sugar levels and you need to minimize the amount of grains that you're consuming, and in fact, grains are a problem for many people, then you can make sure that you're topping up your plate with a lot of plants, whether it's in the form of curry, whether it's form of soups, salads, a good amount of proteins, and then just a little bit of grains, right? So that's how you can start crowding out the unhealthy food, rather than saying I'm going to stop everything, because that may or may not be sustainable for many people. But just by crowding out, you can actually start increasing your intake of these anti-inflammatory foods. So this is a very practical way of doing that. And as I mentioned, cooking oils, I've already talked about this in details, because this is really important. A key aspect of an anti-inflammatory diet is the oils that we are taking in, which means that the fats that we are taking in. I've already explained to you the skewed ratio between omega-3 to omega-6. So if there was one thing, like one takeaway from this presentation, this session, which would help you to lower your inflammation levels, it would be to change your cooking oils, right? So move towards cold pressed oils. So whether it's all the traditional cooking oils that we use, whether it's coconut, sesame, mustard, groundnut maybe, but all of them cold pressed, so that actually when you open the bottle of oil, it actually tells you what oil it is. You don't even have to look at it. And then, of course, you can have something like an olive oil, avocado oil. These can go more for the light cooking and not so much for the high heat cooking. So there's so many different types of oils that you can sort of opt for. But this is a very, very, I would say, a very important step in making sure that you're reducing our inflammation levels using food, right? As I mentioned, there is a major connection between stress and inflammation and pain, but there is also a connection between two skewed levels of cortisol and why it happens in the case of autoimmune conditions specifically, where, and in fact, it also happens in many other chronic illnesses where the levels of cortisol moves from a hyperadrenal stage to where body starts producing lower and lower levels of cortisol and adrenaline, which means a hypoadrenal state, so that just to protect us, right? It's a protective mechanism, and which is when severe exhaustion sets in, but also pain. It also, because cortisol is an anti-inflammatory agent, so it is not around to, sort of manage or modify the inflammation that's going on. But you can start taking steps, by using food as medicine. And I'm going to share with you. I'll do a whole different session on stress and your response to it, and sort of other things that are important. Because as I want to leave you with this, as Mark Twain had said, be careful about reading health books, you may die of a misprint. I find it hilarious, but I still wanted to, I wanted to share it with you. Sometimes we get so caught up in the right diet and the right exercise and the right movement, and we make things so complicated, right? So my role as a coach is to simplify healthcare, simplify self-care, simplify health creation, make it highly practical so that you can start taking steps and see the results from day one. Whether or not you work with me, there are enough resources that I share with you in these sessions. If you're watching this as a replay, as I mentioned, that you can always comment below and say, with the word rainbow, and I'll make sure that I reach out to you with that rainbow diet guide. But my objective here is to share these resources with you so that you can start taking those steps today. These are things that I work one-on-one with my clients, but I also want to ensure that you start feeling better and start getting your life back.